Okay, so today we're going to be looking at looking ahead to your second assignment, which is due in a few weeks' time. Yeah, and we're going to be thinking about how we finance and value professional sport, and we're going to be looking particularly at football, given that that is the topic of your assignment. Okay. So today we're going to be thinking about actually how do we finance professional football. So what are the funding options that we have? What are the different sources of revenue that we have? So if we were looking to develop a stadium, you probably saw the news that Manchester United are looking to develop a new stadium. Well, how are they going to raise that funding? We're going to look at some of the different options that they could use within that. Okay, there's going to be some alternative options, but then also perhaps some commercial funding options as well. Then we're going to be thinking about how we actually could come up with a valuation for what football clubs are worth and how we could go about calculating them ourselves. And then we're going to do a recap of what you have to do for your second assignment. So our learning outcomes today, we're going to hopefully be able to describe the way in which professional sports organizations generate revenue, both on a one-off basis, but also on an ongoing basis. So what are their main sources of revenue? And the appropriateness of each type of finance. We're going to look at the shift in how clubs have financed themselves over the years and what that's kind of look like in the future. We're going to think about the different ways in which professional sports organizations can be valued and the strengths and weaknesses of different models and different approaches to doing this. And then we're going to be getting you to think about your second assignment, okay, and getting you more familiar with the off the pitch platform. So, financing professional sport. So if you think about it, over the last sort of 60 years, at least, there's been a real shift in the way that professional sport has funded itself and the way that it generates revenue and income. If you go back to the start of when we think about professional sport or the professionalism of sport, how do you think it was probably funding itself if we think about football at the top level? What do you think would be the main revenue source to a football club back in the 50s and 60s? Gate receipts, yeah, great. So we're thinking about people actually physically coming to the stadium to come to watch the team. They're paying their money at the gate. They're getting entry and they're standing in the stands. Okay, so nowadays, how do you think those top clubs are fundamentally funding themselves? Broadcast rights, yeah. So there's a real shift between the importance of fans coming to games versus how much they're getting from an international audience and international market. So professional sport now occupies more space than it ever did, with the many hundreds of small-scale community sports activities and emphasis on participation, but these have been overshadowed by the kind of mass spectator appeal of sports and the broadcast interest in these. So we've got this kind of demise of amateurism, which is people just playing sport for the love of it, moving towards a more professional structure. If you think back to our first and second weeks where we looked at different legal structures and how things have changed over time, nowadays it's more about professionalism. There's more a shift towards that kind of boardroom corporate structure and away from that kitchen table model, if you can remember back that far. So the demise of amateurism, that kind of playing for the love of it, particularly in those sports with a large following like rugby, football, cricket, have provided the space for professionalism where many more players can make a living from the game. And if you have a look at that reading from Foster, Gracer and Welsh, the sort of explosion in sports commercial development is the result of the growth in four overarching revenue streams that have taken over from match day receipts as the key revenue sources. So we've kind of got this change in relationships that we're going to look through. So we're going to look at this kind of free phase period here. But if you think back, you mentioned about the gate receipts, for example, the kind of close relationship between sports fans and their clubs, very important, of course. And although that will affect most clubs in the English Premier League, if we think in Scotland, actually, most of those clubs are still mostly reliant on gate receipts. So we can't just apply that principle to all different leagues across the world. So particularly the Premier League is very, very popular from a broadcast perspective, but most of the other leagues in the world will still be mainly reliant on people actually turning up and physically paying. So not all of this will be true for every single situation. But we have this kind of close relationship between sports fans and their clubs, being pivotal to the ongoing sustainability of professional sports competitions and leagues. Various codes of football, for example, have been a steady growth in the fan base, particularly when television viewers of sports are added to the fans who attend in person. So you think, yes, you might have 60,000 people in a stadium watching a match, but actually the number of people that are going to be watching that match via broadcast rights, via a stream online, whether legal or illegal, is going to be significantly larger. And you have that audience for major global events no longer measured in millions of supporters, but potentially billions. If you think about things like the Super Bowl, the World Cup final, the Olympics, we're talking about billions of people that are watching this rather than millions. However, we also have this kind of problematic relationship between clubs and fans in response to the many changes that have taken place to the structure and the practice of many sports. And because of those kind of large changes in the professionalism and the commercialization of the game, there's kind of tensions between supporters and their communities and the way that football clubs in particular are going in terms of their professionalism. So for the last 50 years, the sport-fan relationship has gone through 3 development phases, which each phase corresponding to an increase in sports commercialization and financial expansion. So let's have a look at those 3 stages. So firstly, we've got this kind of integration phase. So if we think back to the kind of start of when football and sport started to become more popular as a spectatorship, you've got sporting organizations being traditionally membership-based. So people becoming a member of a club and participating in its governance and the kind of the organization of it. And as a result, fans have always had a formal way of influencing the club's direction. So they can get involved, become a member, have a say in the AGM, but potentially stand for the board and be involved in that governance process. So that sort of member-based structure meant for the price of a membership fee, fans could vote for committee members, they could seek election themselves, and they could have a direct impact on the kind of direction of that club. So if you wanted to become a member of Stirling Albion, you could go and become a member and stand for the board and have a say in how that club operates. So clubs really dependent for their survival on the contribution of volunteers, so people getting involved and helping out with the club just for a love of the club, right? They're using those volunteer hours to help drive it. So we have this as the kind of first phase of a fan's relationship with their club, very close link, being able to get involved from an early stage in how it was governed and how it was run. Okay, so we've got this kind of integration phase. Our second phase is the negotiation phase. So sports organizations become more commercially minded, thinking about how they can generate more revenue so they can buy better players and offer higher salaries. There's a bit of pressure to develop a more kind of business dimension to the club. Professional staff are hired, so rather than relying on volunteers to perhaps think about going and getting sponsorship funding, you're employing people to go and do that on behalf of the club, full-time positions, and you're creating that kind of professional structure. So those professional staff are hired to secure the club's future, trying to get more funding. They're thinking about broadcast rights. They're thinking about sponsorship. They're thinking about how can they make the match day experience more appealing to fans. Okay. And they're doing that for increased funding and membership. And then decisions are made about a sport's traditional practices in response to the claims of sponsors. And then you have conflicts occurring over the distribution of revenues and vested interests emerge. So I hate to keep going back to them, but if you take Manchester United, for example, the reason they have potentially struggled in recent years is because they have a large debt that has been created by the owners, which they have to continuously serve and pay large amounts of money out to. So although they're generating huge sums of money, they have to pay their directors' dividends and they have to pay interest back on the loan, right? So vested interest there, which the owners themselves created, the Glazer family created. So you have this kind of vested interest, this conflict of interest where they're using the club essentially to pay themselves money. So I don't know if you saw, there was large protests from fans at the weekend against the Glazers and their ownership of Manchester United. So it's probably quite a good example of how these tensions and conflicts can emerge when you have these vested interests that kind of emerge as clubs become more developed in terms of their revenue sources. So we've got disputes are frequent. Fans still believe that they can play a part in the club's progress. So this could be the negotiation phase. Okay. Does anyone know what this picture refers to? This is probably a bit before your time, but which club is that in Newcastle? Yeah. And any knowledge of Sports Direct? Yeah.
The sponsor, were they sponsoring? It's a retail.
So before they were owned by the current owners, they were owned by a gentleman called Mike Ashley, who also owned Sports Direct, and he renamed the stadium the Sports Direct Arena. So he had a personal vested interest in the club, and he was kind of using the club as a vehicle to promote his other businesses and brands. And the Newcastle United fans were very upset about the club being used in a way, and the renaming of something that was very important to them. The name of the stadium was very important to them, goes back for many decades. So there's a kind of a protest that took place, and this is a good example of the negotiation phase, because eventually he took the sponsorship name down and it went back to being called St James's Park. So fans having kind of opportunities to get involved in decision-making process in the direction of their club. But then we have our kind of third phase, which is probably when most clubs are actually at in reality, in the Premier League at least. Okay, so we've got the commodification phase. Now, the commodification phase is really about how is the game being commodified? How is it being made more of a product to people? So how are they essentially trying to get more money from the fan base, okay, or the audience? So our final phase, that kind of coincides with the sport's commercial entrenchment and professionalization, this kind of stage we're at now, multi-million pound businesses, okay? So sport tightens its connection with the sponsors, the merchandisers, and the television networks. A number of things begin to happen. You've got players' earnings beginning to increase quite rapidly. We've got volunteer officials replaced by paid staff. So we're looking now at not having any volunteers at all, but being completely professional in terms of our staffing and our makeup. We've got many fans seeing the sport as just another leisure experience for sale in a competitive marketplace. So rather than perhaps buying a season ticket, they might just go to a couple of games as being a kind of a day out, as opposed to something that's part and parcel of their life. We've got venues being upgraded and replaced with large-scale all-seater stadiums. Again, we could look at Manchester United, look at Tottenham, the way that they've developed their stadiums to become money-making machines for the club that operate all year round, not just on match days. And we've got this kind of escalation of costs of running leagues and clubs, and in terms of memberships and admission charges rise dramatically. So again, we've got a protest here talking about how much it costs for away fans to be able to go and watch their team. And there was a big campaign a couple of years ago called 20 is Plenty. So £20 for an away ticket is that was the campaign to try and cap it at £20 to stop an escalation of fees and charges. So we've got the whole fan profile changing within this phase. We've got traditional fans being marginalized and their space being occupied by supporters whose focus is entertainment, as well as tribal identities. And this is what we call the commodification phase. So what you'll see now is, I'll use Liverpool as an example. I know they're your team. I'm sorry to see them lose the other day. But what you'll have now is they have a cap on the number of, you know the premise of a season ticket. You pay, so Liverpool will probably be £1,000+ for a season ticket, and that entitles you to go and watch the 19 home games that they have season. What they'll do now is cap the number of season tickets that they will have, because they'll know that they can sell the rest of the seats to an international market that want to come and watch the team. And they'll know that those international fans that are coming to watch will probably pay more for a ticket than they would get from a season ticket. And they'll go and spend money at the club store, and they'll buy program, and they'll buy food and merchandise and drink. Okay. So, this isn't a criticism at all, but that is the direction of travel. So those clubs know that they have an international, and particularly a club like Liverpool, which is a huge international brand. Okay. So that is their way, the direction of travel. They know that they can get more money from that than they would from season ticket holders, right? It's the same with West Ham. West Ham, perhaps more reliant on the season ticket base, but they also get a number of international fans that come and will pay more money. So it's this kind of transition of clubs starting to move away from a traditional local fan base to more of an international market, and thinking about how they can generate more money. And actually, more of the kind of local support base have been very vocal about how much they are charging, and kind of fears that they would price out people that would have wanted to have bought a season ticket, but perhaps the numbers are being capped, or they're selling tickets on a one-off basis at a fee that they perhaps couldn't afford. Does that make sense of terms of where sort of clubs are going with this? Yeah. So fans as customers, yeah. So by the end of the phase 3 that we've just looked at, the commodification phase, fans have sort of been transformed into customers as opposed to hardcore fans, right? So the fans as customers model has influenced it as far as they have purchasing power and can provide market research data from their participation in surveys and focus groups. So fans now are consulted on all manner of things. They're generally excluded from the club's decision-making processes. And again, we can go back to things like the European Super League as an example of this, where fans weren't consulted on that. That was a surprise to everyone that these clubs had decided they were going to create this new competition. And that was what fans were unhappy about, was actually that their views and their thoughts hadn't been considered within that. This was an exercise to create more wealth for teams, but fans hadn't really been considered within that process. So while some fans are critical of the state of affairs, others are quite happy to leave it to the clubs as long as they achieve success. So there were probably some that thought the Super League was possibly a good idea because they would have more money, they wouldn't have to pay other teams a percentage of their revenue, and they could go and sign better players and be in Europe every year. Does anyone know what this picture is? Or which sport it is? Baseball, yeah. Can you see the team name on there?
Oakland.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what happened to Oakland quite recently? So they had quite a good history. Has anyone seen Moneyball? Yeah. It was the recommended reading in the first week, right? Viewing, sorry. So they had quite a good history as a baseball team. But last year, the owner just decided, we don't want to play here anymore. I'm going to move the club to Las Vegas. So he's just moved the club across the country from California to Vegas. Okay, so this is the kind of thing. It's slightly different in America because it's more of a franchise setup than it is in the UK. But yeah, ultimately, those fans that grew up in Oakland that supported that team weren't consulted in that. Their views weren't considered within that, and ultimately they've lost their club. So the impact that this actually has on fans, so when we have this sort of fragmentation combined with escalating costs, we've got low-income fans, so fans that perhaps haven't got a huge amount of disposable income to pay for sports, to go and watch sports, are kind of pushed to the margin, and perhaps more privileged fans are those that are prepared to pay for an entertaining experience. The increasing emphasis on entertainment and the increasing cost of attending major sports events are clearly evident in major sports leagues around the world. In the USA and Western Europe in particular, continual increase in player salaries and improvement in venue amenities has produced a general improvement in the quality of the contest and the experience. But these changes have also led to an increase in player salaries and stadium rentals, which has in turn increased to the cost of staging games, which often gets pushed onto the fans. So we'll have a look at how season ticket prices have increased over time. Okay, so that's a bit of background as to that relationship, and perhaps later on we'll look at more current examples which we can point to. But let's have a little think about how do professional sports actually now currently fund themselves. Okay, so the ongoing revenue sources that you're going to be thinking about in your assignments. So we have three main areas of revenue, of income. So we've got our broadcast rights. So this is what we're going to get from the leagues, and the leagues will negotiate on the club's behalf to get broadcast rights, and they'll sell them to BN Sports and Sky Sports and Fox in America, all these different international broadcasters. So the league will negotiate that on behalf of the league, for the Premier League at least, and they will distribute that to the clubs in the Premier League. And they've got a kind of a formula as to how much each club will receive. Some of that will be based on where they finish in the league. Some of that will be based upon how many times they're actually shown on television over the course of that season. And there is also everyone receives a flat fee as well. So everyone will get kind of, a set amount of money at the start of the season. So you've got your broadcast rights, and that's probably now the biggest aspect of income for these clubs. We have our match day earnings. So that's our gate receipts that we mentioned. But that's not just the tickets that we sell. That's what do people come and buy when they come to the game. So match day spend. Do they go to the stadium store? Do they buy drinks? Do they buy food, for example? Okay, so any kind of spend at the stadium on days of matches, and then finally we've got our kind of sponsorship value as well. So how much sponsorship, and we're talking here about shirt sponsorship that we get on the badges and the sides and the back of the shirt, etc. But also perhaps what do we get around the stadium on the match day as well? So how many different advertising boards can we sell, and do we sponsor, the match day sponsor, for example? So let's start with ticketing. Okay. Now this is they're my favourite case study, but this is Manchester United. So this is in 2009. You can see the kind of their makeup of revenue. So revenue is everything that the club generates, right? So all the money that comes into the club before any taxes or anything like that, anything's gone out. So this is everything that they've generated. You can see here that actually in 2009, so how many years is that now? 16 years ago, yeah? Their match day revenue, so people coming to the stadium and paying for a ticket, season ticket, match day spend, is 41% of their total revenue, okay? Their broadcasting is only 35%, okay, and their commercial is only 24%. If we look at that 10 years later, what would you say would have been the biggest changes there? So just 10 years, not a huge time period, essentially. What have been the biggest changes?
More advertising.
Yeah. So they've got much higher commercial income.
More sponsorship.
Yeah. So commercial, sponsorship. Commercial is sponsorship. Yeah. What else would we say have been the kind of key changes there?
More merchandise sale.
Yeah. So fundamentally, if you actually look at the amount, though, they're still generating a lot from match day, right? But as a percentage, from 41% of what they were generating, it's now only 18%. And that's not because people have stopped going to watch them, maybe slightly, but it's more to do with they've had a huge growth in sponsorship and commercial activity and international partnerships and deals abroad. And their broadcasting has shot up as well. So they've gone from 98 million to almost 250 million in broadcasting. So in just 10 years, the amount of broadcasting income that they're generating has shot up. Yeah. Same for their commercial activity internationally. So once that was their biggest source of revenue, it's now a fifth, essentially less than a fifth of what they generate. So actually they could make a lot of money without actually having any fans go to the matches. That's the kind of stage that they're at. So you got gate receipts have traditionally been the single most important income revenue source, although its relative importance has fallen over the 20 years. Whereas it was anywhere between sort of 80 to 90% of the total revenue in the late 70s, it fell as much as 40% in the late 90s, and that's for some clubs it's gone much below that as well. So actually, as we say here, it's not necessarily about falling attendances, but it's actually about how much extra income they're able to generate from these other avenues. Despite that, we're still getting a rise in ticket prices. So even though that is a much smaller percentage of their overall income now, they're still increasing ticket prices. Ticket pricing is still going up, even though they're actually less reliant on it. Now, here's a good example for you. So when England hosted the FIFA World Cup in 1966, you could go and watch 7 games, so 3 group games, a quarter-final, a semi-final, the third, fourth playoff, and a final for a total sum of £2.62, right? And that was in the terraces, or you could pay £15 if you wanted the best seats to watch 7 games at the World Cup. Now, if we take into consider inflation between 1966 and 2018, when it was held in Russia, these 2 packages would have cost £46 in today's money and £268 respectively. Okay, so it would have cost £46 to stand in the terraces to watch seven matches based on what that money was worth now, or £268 to watch it then. However, if we skip ahead to 2018 in Russia, it would cost you £985 for the cheapest route to the final, and actually £2,282 for the most expensive seats. So to watch 7 games at the Russia World Cup, you're looking at 268 for 1966 versus £2,282 being the most expensive. So therefore, if we look at the actual percentage that has gone up, prices have therefore outstripped inflation by over 2,000% for the cheapest tickets and 750% for the most expensive tickets. So you can see that kind of huge increase of the worth of ticket sales, okay, how much people are charging for tickets.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Does it not depend on the inflation as well?
Yes, so this is taking inflation into account. Yeah, so this is this statistic here. So yeah, in £2, you're right. So in 1966, £2.62 was a fair amount of money. If we look at what that would be worth today, it's £46. Yeah, so that takes into account inflation. Yeah, but actually, if we compare that to so that's what it would be worth in 2018 versus what it actually costs in Russia. Yeah. This diagram isn't very clear, but this is a comparison of Arsenal's season tickets since 1980. So this is the ticket price that shot up, this line here. This is the UK average wage in comparison. So this is the percentage of increase. So the wage has only gone up that amount, but ticket prices have gone up that amount, okay? So we're looking at huge rises in ticket pricing, which have well outstripped how much extra people are earning. Okay, so that's ticket prices and kind of your match day receipts. Our second revenue stream is going to be our broadcast rights. So broadcast rights fees are pivotal drivers of sports commercial growth. In America, the NFL has a total value was worth over more than 110 billion over 11 years, which is the richest set of deals in the history of sports. Okay, so again, we can have a look at the NFL TV broadcasting rights. This is dollars, millions per year, and how much that's increased. Okay, so huge increases in terms of broadcasting rights deals, not just in football, but American football. Almost every sport would be an increase in broadcast rights. And I think we've kind of looked at something similar to this, but this is essentially our kind of ecosystem of how this all works and operates and how this makes sense commercially in some respects. So we've got the broadcasters, okay, they're paying money into the clubs. The broadcasters are making their money through the fans are paying their subscription fees. They're in turn also selling adverts, which they're making money from the advertisements, and fans are receiving that. Football clubs are also selling stuff to fans, and fans are also putting money into clubs through ticket revenue as well. But the biggest one that they're going to be relying upon here is the broadcasting rights. So, August 2018, BBC published some research that showed that 11 clubs in the English Premier League could have made a profit without charging fans for their tickets due to increase in broadcast rights. So a question for you is, why is it that ticket prices are as high as they are? So these are the this goes to show the kind of how much those clubs are reliant upon those three different sources of revenue: broadcast, gate receipts, and that will be commercial. So actually, if you look at a club like Bournemouth, almost 9 in every £10 for them that they're generating is coming through broadcast. Yeah, so they're so very unreliant upon fans themselves. So why do you think that's the case then? That 11 of those clubs could have made a profit without any fans turning up to the stadium, right? They've got all their broadcast money and their commercial deals. Why are they still charging as much as they do you think?
The demand for that rate is being met, so why go lesser?
Yeah, essentially it's supply and demand, right? So people want to go and watch it and they're willing to pay for it. That's just how the economics work, right? So yeah, they can charge it, and they are, and I'm sure they will find a use for that money. But yeah, again, just a kind of comparison of the TV rights to the English Premier League and how much those increased in the last since the start of the Premier League. Okay. So yeah, going back to our idea of supply and demand that we looked at when we were looking at decision making and pricing, and this applies to ticket pricing as well. It's a shame that you can't see that diagram. I can move that across. So this is something that you can look at on off the pitch, and it might be something that you're interested in using as a metric to include in your report. But here's what we're thinking about is the capacity for the stadium. Okay, so you might be trying to think about a club that perhaps has got potential to grow in some way, and you might be thinking about how many fans are currently coming to watch them. Okay, so the detail here is the number of seats that the club has in the stadium, the capacity of the stadium, and actually how much of it did they fill. And this is a few years ago now, but here's an example of how well attended those teams are. So actually, even Burnley, who came bottom of the list, they're still selling 85% of all their seats. Okay. So our revenue stream, okay, we can think about our third source of income, which is going to be our commercial sponsorship stream. Okay. So sponsorship has become a major income source. We've got large multinational businesses not only provide financial support in return for use of a team or league as a promotional vehicle, so the shirt sponsorship perhaps, but the arrangement also allows participating organizations to create a co-branding strategy. The team or league gets the benefit of being linked to a successful business partner, whilst the business firm secures a promotional benefit from being associated with high-profile sports organizations and its supporters and viewer base. And there's a research company called Nielsen Sports. They did a report and they showed the global expenditure on cricket sponsorship was estimated to be around $500 million in 2020. The figure highlights the significant financial investment that brands are making to associate themselves with the sport. So huge, large numbers of money are going into sponsoring different sports around the world, mainly because of the exposure it will give them. And you'll also see the types of brands. If you have a look, if you do watch the Premier League at the weekend, whenever it's next on, at the weekend, you'll have a look at the sponsorships that each team has, right? And actually have a look at how many of them are UK based. And you'll see that not many of them actually even sell anything in the UK. They're not trying to reach a UK audience. They're trying to reach an international market because they know the amount of people that are watching that league around the world. So if someone like Crystal Palace, I think they have a sponsor called Bet88 or something like that. You can't even gamble with them in the UK. Like you can't, that's not a service you can actually access. So they're not trying to reach the UK audience. They're trying to reach an international market because they know fans around the world will watch the Premier League and want the value of that. If we have a look at basketball, this is the amount of sponsorship revenue that's gone into basketball since 2009. So even since 2009, it's almost tripled. Okay. And if we have a look at some of those 10 sponsorships in the Big Five leagues, so the total value of kit sponsorships in the Premier League from 2009 to 2020, again, that's more than trebled. Okay. This is from a couple of years ago, 2023, but these are some of the sponsors that the kind of biggest clubs have got. Anything stand out to you about that?
Barca.
Yeah, the Spotify deal. That was an
They
interesting
have
one.
to give their stadium naming rights. That's what it says.
Yep.
But the other clubs don't have that.
Yeah, so that's right. So it's now called the Spotify Nou Camp, I think. Camp Nou Spotify. Yeah.
Arsenal also has the same thing, the Emirates Stadium.
Yeah, so stadium naming rights is obviously a big thing. It probably works better if it's a new stadium, because if you have an existing stadium that's already known as something to the supporters and you try and change the name, they probably won't like it. If it's, historic stadium to them. Okay, if it's a new stadium, there's less attachment to it emotionally. But yeah, I think what's interesting is probably the makeup of these different brands. So actually, none of those. We've got Tottenham, Manchester United, Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City. So what's that? Five British clubs, no British sponsors, like the sponsors themselves. There's none of those are UK businesses. They're American owned, Standard Charter. Obviously, we have Emirates. This is an insurance company, I think, in America. So they're not trying to sell to a UK. I remember a couple of years ago, Manchester United have Chevrolet on their shirts. They were sponsored by Chevrolet, yeah? You couldn't buy a Chevrolet in the UK. So they're not trying to sell to that market. They're thinking about an international market that they're trying to reach. Okay. So what we have here, which we need to sort of think about, is a bit of a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle, depending on how you want to look at it, whereby the wealthiest clubs are also the most successful and have a much broader and deeper fan base. And actually, in short, the commercial success they have breeds on-field success. Okay, you're able to use the money that you get from these big sponsorship deals to invest in better players and invest in a better coaching team, which further feeds the on-field success. So you kind of have this vicious or virtuous cycle where you have more money, which you can buy better players, and you create a gap between the clubs that can afford to do that and the clubs that can't, which is why we have this situation where the same teams appear in the top 6 pretty much every year. If you get a team that gets into the top 6 or top 4 even, it's quite rare that isn't one of those big 6 teams. So we have this study by Szymanski and Kayers found a very close relationship, a correlation between a club's average annual revenue and their league performance. So the more money they generated, unsurprisingly, the better they did in the league. For example, between 1972 and 1990, the highest earning clubs were Liverpool, Manchester United and Tottenham, and they also filled 3 of the top 5 performance sports throughout this period. So actually, we can say that state of affairs is even more evident today with this idea that the top 6 very rarely don't finish in the top 6. This year, we'll see a few different teams because Manchester United and Tottenham aren't going to be in that top 6. But quite interesting that actually year on year we'll have that pattern. So how do you think that's a fair setup? Do you think there could be a better system? What are your thoughts on that?
Like the draft system in the US is where they
Mm-hmm.
give the first picks to the bottom placed.
Yes. Yep. So we spoke, didn't we, about the American setup a few weeks ago and how America actually is a lot more concerned about competitive balance than the European market. What are some of the differences between the British and American models that might allow that to happen? So yeah, we've got the draft system. What else does America do that we don't do in Europe?
Closed league, right?
Sorry?
Closed league.
Yes, they've got a closed league, so it's much easier to facilitate a draft system. They also have a big collegiate college system, which allows there to be a draft system. What else? What are some of the other key differences? What else do they do in America that we don't do in Britain?
More franchise-based.
They're also more franchise-based. Yep. Anything else you can think of? Okay, so they have salary caps. So
More globalized, right?
yeah, they also more equally distribute the money that comes into the league. Yeah, but they also have a salary cap, so it stops one team being able to spend more money than they can afford on a particular player, and that's designed in a way because the American model is more focused on profit maximization. So those club owners are more interested in generating a profit from those clubs than in Europe, where actually most clubs make a loss. And they do that because if you have a salary cap, it stops one team spending X amount of money on a player, and then other teams have to feel like they have to spend X amount on players, and then they don't make a profit, right? They also have a closed league system, so there's no promotion or relegation, right? And you can imagine that if you were bottom of the league in baseball, the midway during the season, most fans in football or rugby or cricket might say, well, we need to spend some money to get better players to get out of this situation. But because there's no relegation, there's no threat, there's no need for them to spend money on players to get themselves out of that situation because there's no risk attached to that, right? So we have a model in Europe which isn't very conducive to being able to make a profit because there's a pressure to spend money on players to improve performance, to avoid the risk of relegation, which can lead to kind of a decline. So there's different structures that we have in different leagues that will enable clubs to make more profit, but actually in Europe, the system is not particularly well set up for clubs to make a profit. It's more focused on performance based and staying in the top leagues. Okay, quick quiz for you. Okay, so question 1. Which revenue stream has taken over from matchday receipts as the key revenue source in sports, according to Foster, Gracer and Walsh? What is the key revenue source?
I'm not able to join.
You can get on?
Use the code.
Yes, the code. Yeah, try menti.com. You can do it on your laptop, actually. I believe the laptop is faster if you want to get a competitive edge on your classmates. So yeah, broadcasting rights are now the biggest source for pretty much most major leagues in the world, not just in football. I'll wait for you. I wouldn't want to give the rest of the class an unfair advantage. Yeah. Okay. Question 2. Oh, question 2. Oh, when's question 2? What is the term used to describe the phase where players' earnings increase rapidly and traditional fans are marginalized? Yeah, it's our commodification phase. Yeah. Okay. Good. Question 3. What are the 3 main recurring sources of funding for professional sports organizations? That's a tricky one, but it's ticket sales, sponsorship, and broadcasting rights. Okay. Why are ticket prices in sports events often high despite increases in broadcast rights revenue? Click the wrong one. Yeah, good. We have more demand than supply. Yeah, so they can afford to charge more then they have to, then they need to. Oh, there we go. Next question. What was the percentage increase in ticket prices for the FIFA World Cup between 1966 and 2018 for the cheapest tickets? Yeah, 2,000%. It's crazy, isn't it? What is one of the benefits for sports organizations in forming sponsorship deals with large multinational businesses? Okay, yeah, good direct financial support. Oh, Zlatan. Who is Zlatan? Who's Bruce? Royce. Yeah, Marco Royce.
Get it wrong, bro.
According to the study by Szymanski and Kayers, what correlates closely with a club's league performance?
Less than. Point. 1 second.
Yeah, good. Their average annual revenue. Still going. Still going.
Where is my mouth?
Well, you chose the wrong one.
What's the correct answer? Average annual.
Revenue. The revenue.
That's what I chose. I chose it so quickly. I guess it didn't enter.
I can only go on what the system tells me, I'm afraid. Have to take it up with Mentimeter. How many clubs in the English Premier League could have made a profit without charging fans for tickets due to improved broadcasting rates?
I mean, I chose the correct option. I didn't go.
In 2008.
I just don't.
11 clubs. Good. So the winner was
Rios. Marco Rios.
Marco Reus.
Marco Rios.
Ah, well done. Well done.
Rolls Royce.
Birthday boy. Your birthday? No? It is your birthday.
No, it's not today.
Not today? When is it?
Today.
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 What's today's day?
13.
The day after tomorrow.
The day after tomorrow.
Hey.
Saturday.
Yeah.
Are United playing that day?
No, it's still better today.
I don't think so. United are losing to someone.
No, man.
Hey, you are a United fan.
Huh?
देखने जा रहे
कहाँ?
मैच अरे जब भी weekend पे
No. Tickets are expensive. Both महंगा.
Yeah, he gone to Liverpool to watch the game
Yes.
in a hotel, in a pub.
Which
He
game?
didn't get a ticket.
Yes,
yeah.
yesterday. Yes,
The PSG game?
Yeah. He
You
came
went-
back yesterday.
You went to Liverpool,
Yeah,
but you couldn't get a ticket.
to watch in a pub.
Shocker.
He did all the merchandise shopping.
Yeah, they didn't even have to sell a ticket to do the other sales.
Yeah, he went to increase the.
That's the tourist exposure we got.
Yeah. Look, you gotta do it whilst you're here. Absolutely. It's no criticism from me. I think it's.
You guys visited the stadium, no, right? I had visited.
Right. Do you want to take 10 minutes and we'll come back and we'll look at the next section. So we'll start back at 10 past 10. Okay.
Just for that day.
Because I sponsor.
After 9. 9.
No, never happened. Feeling so sleepy.
I didn't check.
You put it? No. I booked a partner and send me the link, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I will come on Sunday. I will call him also. रुकना मेरे को भी आता है
What's my name?
रूम में से मेरा वीडियो ले
तो पहले मुझे हमारी वीडियो देखा तो उस दिन
किधर गई
फिर आपने उसको कॉल किया था ना फर्स्ट फोन पर
Which one?
सारे जगह लोग जा रहे थे
अच्छा.
What? This one you're saying? Oh, you were pass now.
डिलीट कर
You
दो
pass? Yeah.
डिलीट कर दो पीटेगा मेरे से तो नीचे
Are you? Do you have?
फोन तो ले ले
Yeah, but yeah, but
When? Late 2 days ago. Yeah, against Arena. So
how many international players do they have?
play
International players
in Saudi. In
in this club.
yeah, lots.
I think Sadio Mane is one.
Nah, in Nasser Sadio Mane.
Oh,
Yeah. So
so they're in the second. അശ്വിൻ പ്രിൻസിപ്പൽ മാനേജ്മെന്റ് അല്ലേ നമുക്ക് രണ്ടുപേർക്ക് ചെയ്യാം. അതല്ല എനിക്ക് 38 ഉള്ളല്ലോ, എനിക്ക് 60 വേണം, അപ്പൊ 62 വേണം. അപ്പോ ഞാൻ നിന്റെ കൂടെ ചെയ്യാം.
ഞങ്ങൾ രണ്ടുപേരും പേരിട്ട് ചെയ്തായിരുന്നു.
കൺഫേം ആക്കിയോ?
ഇവിടെ എന്നെ പറഞ്ഞു ഓർമ്മ.
ഞങ്ങളുടെ തന്നെ ഓർമ്മയുണ്ട്, കാരണം എനിക്ക് 60 വേണോടാ. നിങ്ങൾ അപ്ലോഡ് ചെയ്തോ?
അങ്ങനെ അപ്ലോഡ് ചെയ്തിട്ടായിരുന്നു.
ടോപ്പിക്ക് സെലക്ട് ചെയ്തു?
ഇല്ല, അത് പുള്ളി സംസാരിക്കില്ലല്ലോ. ഇതല്ലേ ക്ലാസ്, അത് കഴിഞ്ഞാല് എല്ലാം ചെയ്യുന്നത്. പിന്നെ എഗ്രിമെന്റ് എങ്ങാണ്ട് അപ്ലോഡ് ചെയ്യണം. നാളെ ഉച്ചക്ക് എങ്ങാണ്ട് പോവാൻ.
okay.
Also have
So
scarf.
yeah, this was to
From
register.
oh, I got told.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
from Mindy is there.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah, Mindy, yeah, it's Mindy, Mindy player. Yeah. So it's
Kese?
good team.
Is Kese there?
It's good team. It does well, man. Asha Cup. Yeah. It's good team.
So how many clubs are playing in Saudi Arabia? 17.
Yeah. Grizzly Liga, the Saudi Liga. So Grizzly. Sorry. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Come on, Adi, what's this?
No, but today I'm fasting. I can't eat. I need to drink.
Oh, you're fast.
Oh, yeah. And
Let me go buy some chicken.
I supposed to had it before 4, but unfortunately I was sleeping.
Oh. So you can eat before 4?
Before sunrise.
Oh, good.
Exactly before 4:30.
4:30.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like
But unfortunately, my last
after
time
the sunset, can you eat?
after sunset, I can. But unfortunately, I don't. Really?
This is last week already from class. I forgot everything.
Oh my god. But even like the video of PCR is also clear in the numbers. Top score. Yeah, I think 17. Yeah, 17. Yeah. 18. Yeah. Yeah, the 820. The third one. The third one. So this is my thing. I love it. Yeah. We're not going on the method. 16, almost 16. And I think it also includes in the game. How many games are there? Yeah. How many games are there? It's 40. Available. 120. Yeah. So also that is then. But tab number 1.
You can drink, right?
No.
Nothing.
No. Because you know what? Because my last time I had imagined it was like in the evening yesterday at maybe 6:30 in the evening yesterday. This is my last time I had it. I was sleeping, so that reason I was supposed to wake up before 4. So for that can prepare something for my stomach, but unfortunately today is hard day.
Also,
Stop. Oh my gosh. I choose you partner? You haven't.
what about you?
Yes, I have. You sure? Yeah. Okay.
Monsoon idea.
How is everyone?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
good. Enjoying life in Stirling?
Yeah, actually, I got used to be here.
Got used
It's
to living
okay. Yes, almost. I don't know, maybe 11 months.
here. Of
Almost-
course, you
almost
came
a
early.
year.
You came early.
Yeah, almost a year.
What about the
It's okay.
Scottish food? You like it?
I like the haggis.
You like haggis?
Yeah, I like haggis. Amazing.
Uh-huh.
But I had it.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes, I had it with my friend. Yeah, in a restaurant. But he
Okay.
said the restaurant is not good.
No. Okay.
But yes, he made it at home. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Great.
Well, I think you like it. Like,
I
yeah.
like it.
You want some,
Yeah,
right?
I like it, but it's quite rare to find international students that like it.
Oh, I love it. But rather have fish and chips, maybe.
You don't like fish and chips? Ah, see, I love fish.
Yeah.
It's got to be good, fresh fish.
Yeah.
You got to go to really like Edinburgh, get good fish and chips on the east coast.
How about Glasgow?
Glasgow, yeah, get good fish and chips. But I think east coast is better.
The best in the book.
Yeah, like St Andrews or somewhere around there.
Yeah. How about Arab food? Have you eaten before Arab food or not?
Well, I was a vegetarian for a while, quite a
Oh,
long time, and then I met my fiance, and she was not a vegetarian, and it just became it became easier to eat meat again. So yeah, well, I'm trying to think of like with British food isn't really that good. I don't think it's not good really. Like there are things that are like a Sunday roast, like roast lamb or roast beef or
Yeah.
roast chicken. That's nice, but like roast potatoes and gravy and vegetables, like that's good. And shepherd's pie? Have you had shepherd's pie?
No.
It's like mince, but with like a crispy potato topping.
uh-huh.
It's nice. So I'm trying to think of other British food that's actually not bad. Toad in the hole. Have you had that? Do you know this? Toad in the hole? No. It's like sausages inside like batter, like in a tray of like. Yeah, it's good.
I haven't tried, but it depends actually. Is allowed or not? I mean, most of suggestions are not allowed to.
Yes.
That's really.
Yeah, pork, right?
Yeah.
You know your pork.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. But yeah, British food is not great. I like Italian food.
Yeah.
That's the best. And Indian food. And Mexican food. Mexican food is good. But I've never been. I'd love to go to Mexico. Maybe for the World Cup. Who knows?
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe.
You should try some Nigerian food.
Nigerian food. Go on. I spent a lot of time in Zambia, and dearie me, watch out for that. And I really like the kind of like maize, like the maize.
Really?
Like it's called. Oh God, what's it called? Mini mill, like mini mill. Shimo. Do you have equivalent? It's like maize that's solidified. It's like mashed potato, but it's.
Okay, it's like mashed potato. Yeah, I get what you mean.
But it's not.
Swallow-
But it's not
swallow-
potato. Yeah, and you have it with like sauce.
Soup.
Yes, yeah, you soup. Chicken or what is it called in Nigeria?
We have different types. We have one made of maize as well.
Yeah.
Pounded yam.
Pounded yam.
So that's
This came on my
solid, more solid
Okay.
than the maize.
start my
Okay.
hello.
Yeah, so that's hefty food.
Yeah.
And we have it with like different
Oh,
soups,
amazing.
vegetables.
Yeah, I tried it actually.
Then we have also like jollof rice. Jollof rice.
Just chicken and
Spicy, very spicy. Nigerians we
Like
a lot of
spicy.
spicy stuff. It helps with our resilience.
When I was in Gambia, they had like a peanut soup, but like It's really delicious.
No
It's very
problem.
spicy. I can't remember what it's called. I'm not very good with
I'll give
food
it again. It's not problem.
Versace, is that like
It's okay.
Shima and Versace, like the
Yeah.
cabbage? No.
We probably have like different.
Yeah. It's a big continent. Yeah.
There's most common actually there in
What
India.
good stuff you're doing there?
Yeah.
With the leading sound.
But
They
it's not
ask
on
him,
cover at the
"Ah,
same
it's
time.
Okay,
Then-
let's start back. It's okay. No. Okie dokie. Right. So this section we're going to think about how organizations fund themselves for like large capital one-off projects. So we're thinking here about a stadium development or something that's going to improve the infrastructure of the organization in some way. So yeah, it could be a stadium, could be a training ground, something where they're going to need a large amount of cash and what are the different options available to them. Okay. So we're going to look at two different types of funding. We've got commercial funding options and we've got non-commercial funding options. So we've looked at the difference between some of the differences. So commercial funding option is where there's a requirement to pay that back in some way, right? So the bank is loaning us money. They're not going to do it just because they like us. They're going to want to get some interest back on that. Okay, so they're going to make money out of loaning us some money. Okay, so that's going to be a commercial finance option. But there's also non-commercial finance options in which you're not required to necessarily pay something back. So by their very nature, we've got our non-commercial funding options, which require you to influence agendas and community-orientated goals. But by contrast, commercial funding options will normally expect a monetary value as well. Such a requirement means that commercial funding is often withdrawn at speed, is reviewed regularly, and makes you much more accountable. So let's look at some of the different options here. We've got for large, typically one-off, sort of non-recurring. So non-recurring meaning we're just going to do it once. It's not going to happen every year, for example. Clubs will rely on types of funding which aren't appropriate to community and amateur clubs. And that's probably because they're not generating enough revenue to be able to pay back any dividend or interest due. So some of the main funding options that we've got here: bank loans, debt financing, bonds, and share issues. So let's start with bank loans. So commercial funding, commercial finance can be generated by increasing equity. So we spoke in the last section about what equity means. It's ownership of an organization. So it could be shares, essentially. So we could increase equity stakes, so the owner could put more money into the organization and they essentially get more shares in that business. But most commercial funding centers on borrowing. So we're actually borrowing money from somebody else. Perhaps the owner doesn't have the money to be able to do it themselves. They need to generate several hundred million and they want to borrow that from somewhere like a bank. So banks probably the best known source of finance and the most widely used source of short, medium and long-term commercial finance. We've got a flexible form of finance here with interest being charged at regular intervals throughout the trading period. At their most basic level, organizations will be given an overdraft facility on their standard account to manage short-term cash flow problems. In such cases, interest rates are fixed much higher than the prevailing bank base rate. So we're going to lend a sports club or an organization money. Okay, we're going to charge them an interest on that. And that is going to be more than they would if they went into an overdraft in their standard bank. So more formal business loans may be offered to finance particular activities and should be negotiated based on sound and robust business plans. Interest rates will tend to be much lower than those on overdrafts, and you're expected to manage payments through revenues and profits that you or the organization generates. Now, the issue is if you default on a payment here, by defaulting, what we mean is if you are unable to make a monthly repayment for whatever reason, this could be really costly and affect your future applications. So it's a bit like applying for a mortgage. Okay, if you get to, some of you may have a mortgage, some of you may be thinking about getting a mortgage in the future, you'll know that they'll take your credit rating into account. Your credit rating is based on whether you've ever borrowed money in the past, whether you've got credit cards, and whether you've been able to make the repayments on those credit cards. So the more regularly you make those payments, the higher your credit rating goes up, which means they'll be more likely to loan money to you in the future. So different types of loans available. We've got corporate loans. This is where a lender gives an amount for a specific or general purpose for a period of time, taking into account the sports organization's assets and revenues. Lenders are likely to require security over all assets of the organization and may also require personal recourse to the owner in the form of a guarantee. So what this means is they're going to give you some money, but if you can't make the repayment for whatever reason, they're going to take the club stadium off you. Okay, they are going to take something back from you if you are unable to make that payment. So you can see that being quite a risky strategy. You essentially don't really want to lose your stadium to a bank. Oops. We've got development finance. Whose stadium is that there? Yeah, Spurs. Boo. Anyway. I'm only jealous. Look at that. It's actually a really lovely stadium, isn't it? It looks great. So you've got development finance. The sports organisations, they borrow money, as Tottenham have done, to finance the purchase and or the development of the site. Funds are typically drip-fed in as and when the costs are incurred, with the lender monitoring closely via its own appointed project monitor. So, yeah, we're borrowing money here to develop something that's going to generate us more revenue in the future. So we've spoken about actually how this stadium has got... has anyone been there? Anyone seen it? No?
Not worth it.
Sorry?
Not worth it.
So you can go onto the roof. I did it a couple of years ago. You can go onto the roof and you can walk across the top. Oops. You can walk up to the cockerel and you can see like all of London. And then underneath the stadium, they've got go-kart racing, and you can go go-karting. And then inside the stadium, they've got like a brewery, and they've got like cheese. They make cheese in there. And so it's a stadium that's open, and they have concerts. They have Beyonce there, different musicians and artists. So they're not just using it on the Saturday when they're playing in the Premier League. They're using it every day of the year. Every day of the year is generating revenue for them as a business. So then when it comes to signing players, they have a commercial economic advantage over some of the other teams because their stadium is generating additional revenue for them, which is essentially what Manchester United want to try and do with Old Trafford as well.
Everything but trophies.
Everything but trophies. Well, neither of them have won any trophies anytime soon. So development finance, okay, to develop a project which is going to generate more income. We've got forward funding future revenue streams. So this is also a very impressive setup. Anybody know whose stadium or training facility this is?
West Ham?
No, I wish. This is Leicester City. Yeah, so the organisation are going to use future revenue streams. So they're thinking that by developing this facility, they're going to be able to increase their future revenue in the future, potentially by perhaps selling players that they've developed through their academy, or perhaps just through that they've owned. Okay, so they're going to use their future revenue streams such as transfer fees, naming rights, sponsorship and merchandise income or broadcast revenue. Basically, any revenue stream where a lender can be certain it can be received by the sports organisation from a credit-worthy source in the future as collateral for an upfront loan. Okay, so it's more about what they're going to generate in the future, and then when you generate that as a result of this development, this investment, they're going to take a percentage of that. Okay, many football clubs do this on a regular basis. And a recent example is Leicester City utilised future transfer fees and broadcast revenue in order to help fund the development of their new training ground. So they've borrowed money up front on the basis that they'll repay that based on what they generate in the future. Yeah. Debt financing. This is a bit more risky, a bit more controversial. So debt financing, increasingly common source of finance in the sports industry, particularly in professional team sports such as football. So we've got debt financing basically involves the sale of an organization's debt to a third party. So they perhaps owe money to the bank, but the bank aren't convinced they're perhaps going to get all of it back. They will sell that package to another party and they'll get some money from that party up front. So then the club will owe somebody else money, not who they originally took the money from in the first place. So this type of finance provides, as its basic level, working capital and improves cash flow, similar to traditional loan. However, debt financing much more flexible than a standard overdraft loan, as it can be renegotiated and paid back at will. So once it belongs to somebody else, you can perhaps renegotiate how much you owe. Okay. They are often arranged on the basis of future revenues, hence the attraction of football, and are easy to secure. The main problem with finance of this style is that it often comes with a hefty interest rate and places huge pressure on the financial organisation to generate profits to service the debt. So benefits of these types of traditional funding models, several advantages, relatively quick to put in place. You can get a loan agreement quite quickly, can be tailored to the situation, allowing a degree of flexibility both from the outset and subsequently if circumstances change and there's a need to renegotiate it. And the terms are confidential other than those which are subject to filings at Companies House and Land Registry. However, the issue with these sources of revenue is often limited by the fact many sports organizations are actually loss-making. So most of them actually have quite a lot of debt, and future revenues will be materially affected by sporting events such as relegation, which tends to give lenders credit committee cause for concern. So if you were Leicester City and if you were that bank that loaned them money to be able to build that stadium, you're going to be a bit concerned that they're probably going to get relegated this year, right? So you're then thinking about their future assets, their future revenue streams, and the fact that they're not going to be playing in the top league. They're not going to have as much money. So is there a doubt perhaps that they won't be able to repay some of their loan? So where a lender would ordinarily look to the value of tangible assets, such as a stadium, they're often reluctant to do this when lending to sports organizations due to the commercial concerns around the value of the sellability of the asset and reputational concerns when enforcing. So you can see a bank probably don't want to use a stadium as a security for giving a loan because one, well, what would a bank do with a stadium? The only thing you can really do with it is play football in it, right? So they're not going to really be able to sell it for land and housing, or they could, but that would be very controversial. And equally, it's not a great look if you kick a football club out of their stadium where they play, right? So it's a risky strategy for a bank to want to do it. We're back to Manchester United. This is the level of debts that Manchester United have. So the Glazer family, they bought Manchester United. They bought it in 2005 for £790 million. And what they did was a leveraged buyout. And what that means is when a significant amount of the borrowed money is used to fund the acquisition of a company with the debt secured against that company itself. So they basically put the club into debt to finance the purchase of the club in the first place. So before the Glazer ownership, United had been virtually debt-free since around 1931. That changed overnight with the takeover, and an additional debt of around 550 million was immediately loaded onto the club to pay for their ownership in it. And it ballooned over subsequent years as the Glazers restructured the finances, peaking at more than 700 million in 2010. So this graph here will show the amount of debt that the club owns. Now, debt in itself isn't necessarily too bad an issue, but what do you think are some of the issues with debt?
I mean, they can't use the money to improve the club's facilities.
Right. Yeah.
It's
So
money that could have been used to make better the club.
correct. Yeah. So whilst they're paying interest on the debt that they owe to various people, mainly the Glazers, that's money that they can't spend on other areas of the club. And you'll see if Manchester United do build a new stadium, they're also going to need to they're going to incur debt of some or liability of some sort to be able to pay for that and to build that, right? So when they do that, they might struggle to be able to afford to pay the best players in the world because they'll be paying to build the stadium. Same with Tottenham, they had similar issues. Same with Arsenal when they built the Emirates as well. So over the years, the debt and the interest paid on it and the dividends handed out to shareholders along the way, the majority going to the Glazers themselves because they used that debt and put it into their own name. So this is the amount of interest they've paid in millions over all those years. So that's money that's been going out of the club to service the debt that they have. Through various restructurings of United's finances, the Glazers have made the debt and the cost of servicing it more manageable to the point where it should arguably not be a barrier to achieving success on the pitch. But now what's coming back round to sort of, I suppose, cause a bit of an issue is that they've obviously made, they've made a number of redundancies within the club. They've been trying to cut costs within the club because they realise their costs are very high. But people are arguing, why are they making redundancies and cancelling? They had a free lunch. Staff could go and get a free lunch in the canteen, which was quite nice. But they got away with that because they said it cost too much money. But actually, if they paid £31 million in servicing a debt, that probably is not going to touch the sides. It's probably less than £1 million that they were paying for free lunches, right? So there's a number of arguments that are coming around that probably don't help. Another way of financing something would be a share issue. Okay, so you could. There are some clubs that are listed on the stock exchange, and you could buy shares in them. Okay, so we've got to offer a share issue, an organisation needs to be listed on the stock exchange. If it is, it can offer more shares to the public in order to raise funds. There are 4 types of share issues: a rights issue, a public issue, an offer for sale, and placing shares. So these are 6 football clubs that are listed on the stock exchange that you could go and buy shares in if you wanted to. Yeah. What do you think would be some of the issues in investing in a football club?
Unpredictability of futures.
Yep. Yeah.
Where they end in like where they end up in the table, like relegation or Champions League football.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's kind of a risk attached to it. Yeah. So what else do you think?
What are 4 types of share issues are like?
Rights issue, public issue, an offer for sale, or just placing shares. So the other issue we're probably facing here is that clubs don't really make any money. They kind of they're loss-making businesses. Probably the exception on this list of Celtic. Celtic are a very profitable club, but yeah, most clubs don't. So if we look at some alternative financing, we've got bonds. So obtaining finance via a traditional option may not necessarily work for all sports organisations. Therefore, we may wish to consider raising finance through the bond market. This is an option which until fairly recently would have been reserved for very biggest organisations, but innovative approaches and regulatory changes relating to bond issues have now made this a possibility for many organisations. And we've got different types of bonds. So we've got a corporate bond, which is made to the issue of a bond for a fixed period by investors who receive regular payments of interest and the principal paid back at maturity. They're listed and can be bought and sold on the international debt capital markets. Okay, so you can buy bonds in different clubs if you wanted to for a set amount. We've also got retail bonds. So we've got Wasps Rugby Club.
What's the difference between a share and a bond?
A bond doesn't give you ownership. A share gives you a stake in the club.
Okay.
So you can, if you have a share in a club, you can attend the AGM and you can go and vote in the AGM. A bond is a financial agreement that you would make. So you might buy a bond in Manchester United. They say they're going to pay, you might give them £100 and they say we'll pay you 5% on top of that over 5 years. So you'll get
Okay, but
£5.
That's the only main difference.
Yeah, there's no ownership attached with a bond. Yeah. So we've got retail bonds, a special type of corporate bond available since the London Stock Exchange launched a retail bond market in 2010. Minimal investment, much lower than with traditional corporate bonds and accessible to a much broader range of investors. We've got Wasps, they raised £35 million in 2015. We've got mini bonds, similar to retail bonds, but unregulated, unlisted and not tradable. Okay, much easier to set up. We've got an example of this being the Jockey Club, which raised £25 million in 2013 and was paying 4.7% interest, plus an added incentive in racing for rewards points. Okay, Norwich City also offered one as well. So we've got mini bonds. We've got debentures, which is also something slightly different. Debentures, typically unsecured debt instruments issued by some sports organisations which pay little or no interest. So you can buy a debenture in an organisation. You're not going to get anything back for it necessarily. It's you giving that organisation some money. The only thing that will probably do is secure you a seat at the stadium for something. So you might have a debenture in a new stadium and that's going to secure your seat. It's quite popular in cricket. So you might have a debenture where that you're kind of guaranteed to get access to tickets for a particular seat.
What if they can't pay it back?
So different ways of going about it. You might ask to cash it in and they might consider whether they can afford to or not. Some people probably won't ever ask to cash it in. Like a debenture, they'll probably just keep it for a period of time. But some of them will be regulated, and if you ask for your money back over a certain period, you have to legally pay it back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some of them will decide whether or not they're in a position to be able to afford to do it. Yeah. So there's different deals and different attachments to each different type of offer that can be run. So whose stadium is that on the right? That's
It says Brentford.
It says Brentford. Here's Brentford, yeah. So when they're developing a ground or a training facility, if you own the surrounding land that can be used for kind of residential, retail, or office space, the present or future sale of rental value of this land can be used to attract the capital required to fund the main development. Brentford did this with their community stadium, include the development of over 900 apartments surrounding the stadium, together with the conversion of Griffin Park to family housing. Okay. Local authority investment. So you could approach a local authority for funding or other support. It's quite a viable alternative where there's sufficient community element, whether that's regenerating an area, providing public space, facilities, affordable housing, or encouraging investment into an area for the benefit of the community. The local authority will also need to generate a fair return, which can then be reinvested into other local projects. So you might have seen some of the discussion from the Manchester United Stadium is they're asking for government support with this. So they would like the government to invest some money because they are making an argument that this is going to be good for the area of Manchester. It's going to create jobs, probably jobs that they've already cut, but jobs nevertheless, and it's going to generate economic growth for the area. Okay. And this is an example. Saracens Rugby Club, they did something similar. So they had some local authority funding to develop a kind of thriving community sports and education facility. Okay. Yes.
In last year, because of the presence of the stadium, the land value around will increase. That's what it is, and then it'll create jobs. That's the thing they're going for.
Yeah. So you can envisage,
especially Brentford.
Yeah, so if they own all of that land, but they only need that amount for the stadium, they can perhaps sell some of the surrounding land for housing or something else. Okay. But also, if you think about if you've got, so the Manchester United one, for example, okay, I know I've been hating on them a little bit, but, you know, if they build a stadium worth 100,000 people are going to turn up every other week, the amount of business that is going to create around that area, people coming to that area, okay, and buying food and drink around it, that's going to stimulate a lot of economic development. It's going to create new jobs. It's going to create new business opportunities. So there's an argument that says to the government, if you help us build this, you're going to see a return because there's going to be more jobs created, more economic development, more people from abroad will want to come to Britain to watch Manchester United, etc. Yeah.
Does that stuff actually materialize?
It would depend, but yeah, I think you could make that argument. You have to be careful, and when we did the sports event session, remember we looked at hosting an international sports event, and actually we have to be very careful with how we calculate some of these things because substitution effect, exactly that. So I think for a football club that is playing every other week, there's a stronger argument because it's more consistent over a longer period of time rather than a 2-week event that happens once every 4 years. And you also need to be careful. So if you take West Ham, when they moved to the London Stadium, that's great. And they've got 60,000 seat stadium, so more fans are going to the game. But they've moved away from a working class area of London. So all of the businesses around that old stadium lose out.
Yeah.
So you have this new shiny stadium, which lots of people are going to. But actually, there's a local area that are now missing out as a result of that as well. So again, you sort of need to be careful with how we calculate some of these things. And Manchester United is slightly different because it's going to be in the same area, right? Sorry.
So why is United listed in the NYSE and not in the UK listing? Maybe because of the Glazers?
Yeah, so there's a number of different reasons they've done that. They're also registered in the Cayman Islands as well. So there's less tax attached to it. So there's financial benefit to them being listed in the Cayman Islands and then being listed in the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Stock Exchange is the biggest in the world, so it's bigger than the London one. Okay, a quick test on those different types of financing. Oops. Okay, everyone ready? Yeah. Question 1. What is the primary distinction between non-commercial and commercial finance options? Yeah, so what we're looking is whether or not there is a guaranteed return. So a commercial financing option, you're going to have to require to give a guarantee that the money will be repaid in some form. Okay. Non-commercial, there's less of a scrutiny on it, less of a requirement to do so. What is a characteristic of bank loans as a source of commercial finance? Yeah, they're pretty flexible and they can involve an overdraft facility, which could be helpful for a sports club. Dr. Centipede. What type of finance did Tottenham use to finance their stadium? Yeah, development finance, good. What is the primary collateral used in forward funding future revenue streams as described? Yeah, so we're looking at what income we're going to generate in the future, whether that's going to be transfer fees or whether that's going to be broadcast revenue. What is a characteristic of debt financing in the sports industry as described? What are advantages of traditional finance as described? Yeah. Why are lenders often hesitant to provide traditional finance to sports organizations? That's also true. I'm going to change that question.
Yeah,
that's also true. But it's mainly around what would they do at the stadium if they had it. As a result of debt financing, what was the additional debt loaded onto Manchester United after the Glazers takeover? Yeah, 550 million. will change at the top. Very exciting. What is a characteristic of the retail bond? Yeah, it allows for a lower minimum investment, so it's accessible to more people. What distinguishes mini bonds from retail bonds? Yeah, unregulated, unlisted, but not tradable. Okay, so you could buy a bond, you wouldn't be able to trade it to somebody else. Okay, and the last question. What is the characteristic of debentures issued by some sports organizations? Yeah, they guarantee holders tickets to popular sporting events. Is there going to be a change at the top? Yeah. You hula hop. Congratulations.
If you
Right.
that's a normal.
Okay, last section before we look at your assignment again, and then we'll finish up. So our next section, we're going to look at how we actually go about valuing sports clubs and organizations and the different methods involved. So a number of different methods that can be used. None of them are exact. So you can imagine like trying to buy a house, pretty hard to actually say how much a house should be worth. Often it's actually how much is it that somebody is willing to pay for it. But a variety of methods, none of them exact, part art, part science, but we also need to do the kind of the maths sciencey bit to be able to get to the art bit. So there's no such thing as the right price for a club, okay, but we can use the statistics and information available to us to try and create something that we feel that feels kind of right. Simplest way to value a club would be to look at the total of its net assets in the balance sheet and use this as a figure. However, this would be a pretty poor approach and not recommendable. Why do you think that is? You can think back to our session on balance sheets and what we consider to be assets. If somebody was to look in a balance sheet for some clubs, why would they not be a particularly accurate depiction of what the value of that club is?
Because I mean, future liabilities won't be.
Okay, future liabilities. Yeah, good. We need to take that into account. We don't know that from looking at the balance sheet. We know the liabilities, but we wouldn't necessarily know what division they're going to be
Like
playing or.
Composition of the club, like do they have a lot of aging players, something like that?
Good. Okay, that's something to think about. Yeah. So actually, perhaps doesn't take into account the value,
And do
the
they
book
have,
value
like,
of the
more,
players.
Future like sources of revenue, like transfer fees.
Good. Doesn't take into account future revenue. Yeah. What else might be an issue with looking at that and trying to come up with a valuation? What consists of assets?
Vehicles and all those stuff are depreciating assets.
Okay, so we might have an asset that's depreciating, although that would probably come up in the balance sheet. What wouldn't come up in the balance sheet? What are assets?
Something that the club owns and they are generating revenues.
Okay, so what are our main assets as a sports club?
Players.
Players?
Tickets,
no.
merchandise, holdings.
Tickets, merchandise. What did you say?
Fans.
Fans? No.
Fans are not
Okay,
assets.
fans. We can't. Good point. They're not considered within the balance sheet, so we won't see that in the balance sheet. Could have a huge fan base, which could be quite valuable to us, but it's not going to appear in the balance sheet. What else? What's the biggest asset a club will have? Could be a player, but I'm thinking
Stadium.
Not all clubs own their stadium, right?
Mhm.
So actually, we maybe need to think about whether or not that is a good way to look at it. If we look at the net assets and there's no stadium in there, but they're still generating lots of money and they're able to play there every week and they've got a right to play there, then actually we might need to rethink that. That's my man, Declan. So one thing to say about players as well is, yes, we do have a valuation of the players in our balance sheet. Okay, but one thing that we can't actually put a value on are players that have come through an academy because we've not paid any money for them, right? They've been developed by the academy. West Ham sold Declan Rice for £100 million to Arsenal, but that asset doesn't show anywhere until they sold him that he didn't appear as an asset because they never paid anything for him. And going back to our definition of assets from a few weeks ago, there was never a transaction in which they had to pay a certain amount to develop him as a player. So the balance sheet is not going to include players like Declan Rice or Messi, who Barcelona sold for a lot of money, who wouldn't have appeared in their balance sheet, or when Aston Villa sold Jack Grealish to Manchester City, for example. So players that have come from a youth academy don't appear in the books. And that's why you're seeing a lot of chat about players selling their academy players because it's considered pure profit. Amortization, yeah, exactly. So it's pure profit because they never paid a fee for them in the first place. So they're selling them for 40 million. Yeah. So we need to think about stadium. We need to think about players that have come from the youth academy. We need to think about the fan base. There's a whole range of things that aren't shown in the balance sheet. In terms of our assets. So balance sheet isn't always a good indication of value. So issues in using the balance sheet for valuations, as we say, assets such as the stadiums tend to be undervalued too, as the accountants measure them at the original cost figure, which may be decades old, less depreciation rather than current market value. Other assets such as loyalty of fan base and renewing season tickets, the club's brand value and its database of customers and fans and their buying habits in relation to football are also ignored in the balance sheet. And in addition, the balance sheet only shows the assets and liabilities of a club on a particular date. So if the valuation is months later, the balance sheet will be partially obsolete and probably be kind of out of date and not reflective of the actual change in the club's finances. So when we look at the assets of a club, we know that actually the market value of the assets is completely different to the book value. So the market value of Declan Rice was 105 million. The book value was 0. So that's quite a big difference, right? Not only do we know that the real value of the players is different from their net book value, but we're also missing some important assets of the club in the balance sheet. So as we say, it doesn't reflect the fan base, potential future growth for the club, the brand and its reputation. So actually that makes us realize that the book value, not a particularly good reflection of the real value of a club. So there's an off-balance sheet that we need to consider here. And these are some of the off-balance sheet things that we would perhaps add up. So players, fan base, future growth, inflation, and reputation. These are all going to be things that we'd probably consider when we were thinking about buying a club, right? So these are all things that you might want to think about when you're looking at the clubs that you want to write about for your report. We could look at a stock market valuation. So we could look at what the club would be worth on the stock market and what one share would be worth and try and work out what buying all of the shares would be worth. So a value of a company on the stock market at any one time is the value of a single share multiplied by the number of shares. So if we look at Manchester United in August 2020, the club had 164 million shares with a price of $15.43 each, giving a total market value of $2.5 billion. And that calculation is okay for someone that wants to look into making a small investment by buying a few shares, but somebody that would want to control the whole club would need to acquire at least 50 plus 1% of the voting shares. And it could only be some existing owners reluctant to relinquish their shares. So the only way to persuade them to sell would be to offer them extra money over and above. They'd perhaps be unwilling to part with their shares for what they paid for them. So you probably end up paying a lot more than you have to. Got comparative sales values, okay? So thinking about what other clubs have sold for and trying to work out whether or not that feels right for the club you're interested in. So if you were looking to buy a house, one way would be to look at the other houses on the street and see what they sold for, right? And to work out what would be a fair price for that house. Same thing with football clubs. So the houses are being compared at a nearby, then a buyer can start to get a feel for the right price to pay in the particular location. The houses are going to be different. They're going to be painted differently. They might have different number of bathrooms or bedrooms, for example. So we need to think about some of those differences. But actually, if it's in the same area, it's more about the location that where the house is, perhaps, than some of those other features. So it's perhaps a particularly nice street that you'd want to buy on. Okay, so it's the same with football clubs. The more expensive football clubs tend to be in areas that are bigger. So big cities. So clubs in London will sell for more money than clubs elsewhere in the country. Why do you think that would be? Why do you think the geographical location of a club might have an interest or an influence on how much it's valued at?
Population of the area.
Population, yep. Yeah, wouldn't be much sense buying a club in a very smallly populated area if you wanted to try and make some money from it. Yeah. What else?
More tourist attraction.
Yeah, good. Yeah, if it was lots of things to do, then people might come for more than just the football. Yep. Anything else? Why do you think London clubs are worth more?
It's the capital.
Sorry?
It's the capital.
Say again, sorry.
Because it's the capital of.
Because it's the capital, and yeah, right. But what? Why else? What does that mean? What happens in London?
The economy is good there.
Good.
London compared to other cities.
Why?
Because it's the capital, is more population, more trades are going on there.
Good. Lots of businesses are located there.
Yeah.
So you might have more sponsorship if you had businesses based there. Yeah. You might have better transport links if you've got a club in London. It's much easier to get to the stadium without having to drive. Yeah. So all of these different factors might come into play as well. You've got lots of very wealthy people that live in London that might want to buy a hospitality box. Yeah. So thinking about the location itself is also quite important. So if you think about buying an apartment in central London or New York, it's going to be more expensive than it is in Sterling, unfortunately. Okay. So adopting a similar approach when we think about a football club has same pros and cons. We could think about its future revenue. So we could try and look ahead to the future and work out how much money the club generates in 1 year and try and work ahead to the future. But an investor would need to be looking for the club to generate profits. So the ability for a club to control costs is an alternative. So we need to try and work out which profit measure to use. Is it EBITDA? I think we've looked at this before, but this is what we earn as a club before we have to pay any tax. Okay. Interest and taxes. We've got EBITDA. This is probably going to be a better, more representative metric to use because it's our earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So how much are we actually earning before all of those things are taken into account? We've got net profit, sales minus the business costs, and we've got cleaned net profit, which is net income, which does not contain any comprehensive income or unusual items. So large player sales, for example, purchases, sorry. But then we've come to this method, which is the Markham multivariate model, and it's invented by a guy called Tom Markham, who wrote a PhD thesis about it, and he looked at the quoted prices for a number of deals, identified the key differences in terms of the clubs being sold and the prices for the transactions, and arrived at the following valuation formula. Okay. So what we would do is we'd work out our revenue for a club, add in the net assets, multiply that by the net profit plus the revenue, divide by the revenue times the stadium capacity as a percentage divided by the wage ratio. Okay, so what I'm going to get you to do is try and work out the valuation of Newcastle United based on this method. I've given you all the numbers there, so have a go at trying to work out how much Newcastle United would be worth using that information and that formula.
This is the answer, but that's like that's why he has such a question.
Okay.
What are you going to do?
Yeah, 353.
It's already given.
So
there,
it's
no?
already there in slide.
Yeah, in this for some reason it's not there. So you won't. Even if you do it on
It's already
calculator, it comes 353. Yeah. Download split wise.
नहीं वो कुछ और किसी और की।
Reading the percentage. The formula trading the percentage.
Okay. Do we have any estimations?
Yeah.
Anybody willing to have a go?
3.39.
353 mil. So we've got our 187 times by 1.1 times by 99.3, which is divided by 57.8, which should give us £353 million. Everybody get that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
353.39.
Lovely stuff. Okay, so advantages of using that as a method. So it uses industry-related data, produces a range of values. So it takes into account a wide range of different factors there. We're looking at how well utilized the stadium is. We're looking at how much turnover we've got. We're looking at how well managed the ratio is for revenue to turnover. Okay, wages to turnover. Disadvantages based on history, not the future. So actually, the fact that Newcastle United have since been in the Champions League, for example, doesn't take into account that. Football industry is very volatile, so actually things are going to change as well. Methods only value in the cases of profit. What if a club doesn't make a profit? Very hard to actually work out. Okay, and ignores vanity aspect of owning a club, which is that some people actually don't care if it makes them money or not, right? They're not really cared. They're not bothered about getting a fair valuation for a club. They just want to own a club. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to your assignment. A wee reminder: has anybody started it? No, fair enough. You had a week off. So you're working as a financial analyst for a major firm. Just to remind you of what we went through last time. Okay, major firm of accountants and advisors specializing in the sports sector. And your company has been approached by a wealthy overseas client who wants to buy a British football club. At this stage, the overseas client is relaxed about which club and is content to allow you to put forward suggestions. The first part of your case study report is to identify a prospective club for purchase and to provide a brief background on the club. This should include some reference to the club's history, its sporting performance, and, as appropriate, its broader social and or political role. The club also needs to be placed in its geographical and hence financial context. What I mean by that is what we were talking about there. So absolutely don't want to see 13 essays using clubs in London as an example, but thinking about where your club is going to be based and is it going to be in a big city? And it doesn't have to be in a city either, but just looking for some understanding of that context of why you've chosen the club you've chosen. Yeah. And not just picking a club out of the air and not thinking about why there might be value within that purchase, right? So thinking about the geographical and hence financial context, and this section also needs to be fully referenced. And by that, I mean actually using different sources, academic sources, websites, not necessarily Wikipedia though. So that's the first part of your report, is that kind of background to the club. Okay. Second part of the report is going to be using off the pitch. We looked at off the pitch before, but we'll go back to it in a wee minute just to get you more familiar with it. And you're required to present appropriate but selective comparative financial analysis over the last few years. So you're going to choose a range of metrics to show how well that club has performed financially, and that's going to be used to justify your decision for purchasing that club. The client is relaxed about the investment club. You must select a club for which there is adequate financial data available via off the pitch. And that's important because there are going to be some clubs that are very small that don't have to provide information via Companies House. They're so small that they don't need to provide it. So you need to choose a club that's big enough that has provided adequate financial information. You should also avoid clubs that have only recently been purchased. So, for example, Chelsea, Manchester United, and Newcastle United. So this still leaves you around 80 clubs to choose from. As a leading financial analyst, the key element of your contribution will be the quality of your discussion of the financial performance and position of the club. Okay. Now, the last section of the report is really important. Please don't forget to write this bit because this is quite critical. We've looked at some of the issues over the module about how we value sport, right? And we've looked at things like what are the issues with budgeting? What are the issues with financial statements, okay? So although you're going to be basing your report, a large part of your report, upon financial information, we also want you to critique the extent to which that can be valued and trusted. So the client, great believer in Einstein's mantra that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So what we mean is, yes, we are using these data and these metrics that are available to us, but we also need to use some personal interpretation within that as well. This isn't the full story. The stuff that's presented in those financial accounts isn't just the truth, and we need to believe it, right? It needs some interpretation. It needs some critical analysis from you to say why this is strong or why this is weak, okay? So particularly we're looking for a critique, a criticism of financial information in general, and why there should be other factors that make the club valuable to the investor that won't appear in that financial analysis. Is that clear? Yeah. And what we want you to do is use literature from week 7. Okay, so from the 2 weeks ago, it's on Canvas. Okay, and we want to see that section referenced with academic sources provided for that week. Okay, particular art papers that critique financial information. So the clients asked you to provide a critique on the usefulness of published financial statements for organizations like football clubs, and to identify other information which may be relevant to the investment decision. This final section must draw upon academic literature to inform your discussion. It is highly recommended that the readings detailed on week 7 of Canvas are utilized there. It might be week 6 now, because week 7 was mid-semester. Okay. So, potential structure to your report, an introduction. This needs to be literally a couple of sentences. This report is going to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah? Doesn't need to be extensive. The background to the club, we need to write about which club it is that we've chosen. Then we've got the bulk of our assignment, which is going to be the financial analysis, which is where you're going to choose some metrics, up to you which metrics you choose, but to highlight why you're choosing a particular club, that particular club that you've introduced. And what we're looking for within that is your analysis of that as well. So don't just repeat what's in the graphs and the diagrams and the numbers, but actually what does that mean in practice? If you've used EBITDA as a metric that we've looked at, what does that actually mean in reality? What does that mean to the person interpreting that? What does that make a good club to purchase? Okay. And then your overview of the usefulness of financial information is important as well. So making sure you're using readings from week 6 to inform that. And then a very brief conclusion. Again, introduction and conclusion don't need to be more than a couple of sentences each. In terms of how many words you might choose to give to each section, thinking about how the weighting of the grades is split up. So your clarity of your club background and context. Don't spend too long talking about things that aren't important here. You've only got essentially 20% of your words, okay? Your quality of your financial analysis and discussion. Think about how you're going to present that data. That's going to be 40%. Your academic critique on published financial statements is going to be 30%. So again, thinking about using 30% of your words there. And you'll get 10% for your structuring and referencing, yeah? Advice, consider all of the question. Don't forget any of the sections that we've highlighted there because you won't get marks for them if you do. Remember, we're not asking you to value the club per se, but you might want to think about doing that. You might find some information about what it's roughly valued at and why you think that's good. Consider why somebody should purchase it. Ultimately, is what we're asking you to do, though. Provide some background and some evidence of why you think it makes a good investment. Think about which metrics are going to be most useful here. What might investor actually want to know from the club, and how can you demonstrate the value to the investor? Demonstrate you understand the metric you're using within your report. So as we say, if you use EBIT or EBITDA as an abbreviation, what does that actually mean in practice to the club or the buyer? And then think about the other clubs you want to compare. So we're asking you to compare the club you've chosen with perhaps 4 or 5 other clubs to compare how the club is doing relatively, yeah? So don't choose Manchester United if you're going to compare it with Leyton Orient and Sterling Albion and very small clubs. Think about comparing it with the other big 6 clubs in England, okay? Explain the rationale for comparing these clubs as well. Within the introduction, you might say, we have compared the information of Manchester United with X, Y, and Z because they make up the big 6, or because they're all located in the same area, or because they're all in the same division, okay? And don't forget to critique the usefulness of financial accounts. Really important, because as we say, there's quite a lot of grades attached to that section. Okay, so going to get you to use Off the Pitch now. So if you can go to offthepitch.com and log in with the details that you created last time. If you can remember your password. Okay, and then if you go to My Account, you're going to the comparison tool. Now, a quick reminder of what we're doing when we get to the comparison tool. So I've asked if you can have a think about these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 clubs. Okay, so we've got Wrexham, Chelsea, Barcelona, Newcastle, Tottenham. So that's, was it Arsenal? Chelsea. So let's find Wrexham. Or we can search for them, except I haven't got a keyboard, so. In fact, Wrexham might be so small they're not on here. So let's just choose Portsmouth. Let's choose Barcelona. Now remember, we're asking you to use British clubs, so this is just purely for example. Newcastle, Tottenham. Okay, so we've chosen the teams. Now, obviously, you wouldn't choose to compare these 5 clubs because they're across different countries. They are in different divisions. They are, they're just different stages, okay? But you might choose to compare Chelsea, Newcastle, and Tottenham, for example. So let's have a look at what do you think is the value in perhaps trying to compare the following clubs. And what does relying on the financial data not tell us about these clubs? going to choose a different club actually, sorry. Okay. So a reminder just that we can change our parameters, so the information that we want to select through here. Okay. Could be turnover, broadcast income we were looking at, could be EBITDA, as we said, could be wages that we're looking at. We might be interested in liabilities as well. So our first one that we chose was EBITDA. So remember that our definition here is the earnings that the club makes before tax, depreciation, amortization, and profit on player sales. Okay. Now, what would stand out to you straight away looking at the data presented? What would be a concern to you straight off the bat?
Barca's negative.
Barca have got a negative, yeah, for 4 of the 5 years, yeah. Be concerned that Birmingham City, who haven't actually made any profit before any additional taxes are taken into account either, yeah. Okay, let's have a look at our wages. Something we probably want to be a bit concerned about here, for example, would be the fact that Barcelona 1 year had 625 million. Okay, so again, we're thinking about cost control. Is that going to be sustainable based on what they generate? Okay, liabilities, this is going to be important. Tottenham have got very high liabilities. What might some of their liabilities consist of? Stadium repayments and loans, yeah. But actually more concerning perhaps would be some of these Barcelona numbers. They've got huge liabilities here. What are their liabilities likely to be attributed to? Transfer fees, yeah. They're also developing the stadium, so it's going to be attached to loans to that. So you're thinking about whether that's going to be sustainable or whether that's going to be a cause for concern. Okay. If we were looking at Champions League, that's obviously not going to apply to some of those teams. Okay, so there's lots of stuff in here that we can read into, but what doesn't this tell us?
Why we should
Sorry?
suggest that?
Yeah, so I put Birmingham in there because I don't know how much you follow League One in England, but they're top of League One by a long way. So it's likely they're going to be in the Championship next year, which means they're just a division away from being back in the Premier League, right? So they might become a more desirable purchase if they're going to get into the Premier League, okay? So that doesn't show up on here, right? We're not going to see that in the balance sheet. We're not going to be able to see that. So we need some personal interpretation there to be able to say why that makes them a good investment, right? So just have a little play around. Have a think about what metrics you want to play around with. Think about having a look at some of the data as well, so you can produce the graphs if you want to. Yeah. And perhaps try and work out which club in the UK is the biggest in terms of revenue. Don't forget you can change the currency as well. You change it to pounds if you want to. Make sure you're consistent. When you're including graphs, make sure you're including a title for the graph and you're including what valuation it is, if it's going to be pounds, if it's going to be euros. Yeah. So the reader knows what it is that they're looking at. So yeah, just have a little play around for 5-10 minutes. think about what club you would like to start writing about. You can break it down into different metrics they've got here. Let's so I know obviously we've got Manchester United fans in here, don't we?
Yeah.
So let's put Man U in here. Have we got any Chelsea fans? No. One Chelsea fan. We've got one Liverpool fan? Two Liverpool fans. Let's put West Ham in just because. And what about the last two clubs? Who should we have?
Arsenal?
No one likes Arsenal. Any other teams? We could put some international
Man
teams
City.
in. Man City. Let's put in Everton because I think Everton are quite interesting, and Man City. Just to see. So let's choose. Let's have a look at the match day income. Let's have a look at the broadcast income. And let's have a look at our commercial income. So remember, they are the three main strands of income that we looked at the start. Let's have a look at long-term liabilities and let's have a look at net assets. Oh, wages to revenue actually will be good. And net assets. Fixed assets. Okay. So you might try and like draw out any trends that you think are going to be important as well. So we have a look at the graph. It makes it easier to present the data. So clearly, we've got Manchester City performing very well from broadcast rights. Yep. We have a look at our match day income, so how much they're generating from their stadiums and the match day itself. Manchester United are the most successful. Okay, so it's kind of interesting to see that comparison. If we have a look at our commercial income, again, Manchester City are the most popular. Look at West Ham down the bottom there. That's ridiculous. Big stadium, big fan base. You'd think they'd be doing better than that. Hey, listen, there's a big fan base. I tell you what, right? No, you said that. No, you said that. Let's have a look at stadium utilization, right? Because that's going to be quite an important metric. You've triggered me now. They are a big club. I'll prove it to you.
What about owning the stadium?
Okay, so we've come to our.
They don't have their own stadium.
You don't need to. It's overrated.
Oh,
Yes. Enterprise value. Okay, let's have a look at enterprise value. So that is what this is using a metric that they provided. You might choose to talk about that. But what we're interested in here is stadium utilization. So remember, our stadium utilization is the percentage of tickets that we sell in terms of our capacity.
Wow, United, nice.
So what slightly misleading here are let's go to the top. So enterprise value. It's a bit tricky because we've got COVID related. Manchester United as well, somewhat affected by being on the stock exchange. So, but we can see that how the clubs are different, how they're valued differently, and actually, Manchester City, using their metrics, are considered a more valuable club than Manchester United, which is quite interesting, I think. We look at our stadium utilization rate. They're all pretty well utilized. But look, who's that on top? There we go. Big club.
Can't see.
Big club. Can't see?
Yeah.
Big club.
Yeah, slight margin.
But they also have one of the biggest stadiums. So it's even more impressive. Anyway, moving on. Commercial income. Oh, it's not loading. So you see my point. You can use these different metrics and play around with them and try and find patterns that you think make a compelling narrative or make a good argument as to the type of club you think the investors should be purchasing. Okay? Any questions about that? I think you have about a month from now to write it. So I'll do a session where you can come by and ask any questions if you want to once you've started it and you think, actually, I'm not quite sure about this or I'm not quite sure about that. I'll set some time aside that you can either on Teams or in person at the end of the session. Yeah. How does that all feel? Are you quite comfortable with what you have to do?
About the financial analysis part, like, do we add in the numbers or like how do we describe all those numbers?
So that's kind of up to you, but what you need to do is think about how it's presented. Remember, it's about presenting it in a way that is easy for the reader to understand. So you could include the table, but think about whether that's better presented in another way. So you could include the graph if you wanted to.
And then describe the graph.
Yeah. 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 Any other questions at this stage? All the assignment details are on Canvas, remember? One thing from your first assignments, which were largely good, the bit you missed in your reports was like the financial analysis, the critical analysis part. So you did really well with getting the spreadsheets were great. The bit that was often missing was the implications of the budgets on the organization. So what would have happened to the organization if they had followed that budget? Like what was the longer term analysis? So what we need to try and get is the kind of critical analysis part in place in this report. So what do the numbers actually mean? Like you've highlighted something, but actually is there another angle we need to think about here? Okay. Any other questions? Or are you just like sick to death of it already? Otherwise, you're free to go. We'll finish there. We're a bit early. Give you half an hour back. And yeah, I'll see you next Thursday.
Can we use real time results? Like if I choose Aston Villa, they are in the Champions League position. So can I say that as an
yeah, you can talk about that as in terms of the context and the introduction, and yeah. So that's also good for your critique of the financial information part, right? So some of this data isn't going to capture the fact that this year they've done really well because it's year-old data, right? This only goes up to 2024. Some of them haven't even published for 2024. So if Aston Villa haven't published, you might not see how well they did last year, and certainly not this year. Yeah. Okay. All right. Have a good day. See you next week. And West Ham are a big club, okay?